So,
Welcome to Stories of Brisco and Bradshaw. I would be Bradshaw, and that would be your Chickasaw native, your Chickasaw Hall of Famer, Oklahoma's favorite son, Mr. Gerald Brisco. And we have got part 777 of the Welch Dynasty. Maybe, perhaps, the greatest family in wrestling history. We think for sure it's probably the biggest family in wrestling history with the Welches, the Fullers, and all the things that go with all that. But we've had a great time with wrestling's greatest historian, our good friend, Mr. Tony Richards, and Tony is back. Tony, welcome to part 7 of the
Yeah,
Welch Dynasty.
yeah, man. Glad to be here. Glad to be back with you guys. And we got probably today, and we got one more part 8 of this great series. And there's no doubt in my mind, my biggest disappointment is that probably in no wrestling Hall of Fame will you find Roy Welch. And I think that's a terrible, terrible thing. And I think through this series of shows that we've done, I hope that we will put the name in a lot of people's minds and their memories and their thoughts about remembering them, because what he really did was super phenomenal. And I give Roy credit for all of these things we're going to talk about today, all the things we're going to talk about next week, because he's the guy that went in there and started it all and held it together and was the backbone of the entire operation.
Well,
now
no,
I'm gonna do something right here, John and Tony. What do you call it when you bust open news? Spoiler alert or whatever they call that
spoiler
thing.
alert.
Spoiler alert.
But yeah,
Coming up July 9, 10, 11 in Waterloo, Iowa, the George Tragus Hall of Fame, Dan Gable Museum of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame is going to honor the Welch family dynasty by inducting Ron Fuller into her Hall of Fame. But it's a
wow.
family award this year, so
Awesome.
please be there. And Ron Fuller, what a great guy, what an athlete, as we'll get in a little bit later on, and what a historic family. But now you can say and members of the Dan Gable George Tragus Lou Thesz Hall of Fame in
Well,
Waterloo,
Breaking
fantastic.
news. Breaking news right here.
Whack, 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 whack.
Iowa.
That's awesome. I can't believe that Roy Welch is not in a Hall of Fame.
I can't either.
Yeah,
That's
well,
shocking. One of the greatest promoters. I mean, it has an argument for the greatest promoter of all time, but certainly one of the greatest. There's no doubt about that.
we're certainly going to open up the show today with some amazing numbers about what they were doing at the end of the 60s and where they were in the mid 70s to close out today's show. So, I mean, we continue to make the case for what a fantastic impact that he and his family had on the professional wrestling business.
You know, the three of us, we're all kind of the same of the history of, but we like the business side of the history of our show too. And I think that's Tony. That's what you kind of led us backstage in on that territory, on the what's Dynasty territory, is the backstage numbers and to go over some of these numbers. We're talking
Sure.
20, 30 years ago. I mean, we're not talking
Yeah.
last year. We're talking when the population did, and the TV didn't have all this streaming stuff, when you had to do it right in house to get a return crowd back in your house there. And these guys were brilliant enough with and figured that all out. Where they used TV as their tool, of course, but they also used those angles inside the arena to help draw it and business shaking our thoughts and ideals at the time. And Tony, you're better than I am at explaining some of this stuff. So
Sure.
jump in there, my friend.
Well, the thing is when I'm pretty thoroughly convinced that when Roy was one of the main people in the National Wrestling Alliance back in the 1950s, and he was the NWA member, and his office in Dyersburg was the official NWA office, even though they had an office in Nashville, and even though he had a partner, Nick Goulas. The one time where Roy really was the forefront of the Tennessee territory was in the National Wrestling Alliance, in the backroom politics and things of that nature. And there's no doubt in my mind that when the news started spreading about what Jim Barnett had done, and we covered that in our Jim Barnett series, when he started television in Indianapolis and Cincinnati there toward the middle of the 50s, when the Dumont Network was starting to falter and to shut down, and they were going more to studio wrestling, and that transition was happening. He never missed a great business opportunity, and he saw what that was doing, And they brought their first show on in Nashville in 1955. And they were drawing 3,000 or so to the Hippodrome there. But by 1969, they've been on television in Nashville for 14 years. And they've moved now from the Hippodrome over to the Nashville Fairgrounds Arena, which was a brand new building built in 1965. But in 1969, they sold over 200,000 wrestling tickets to the Fairgrounds Arena in Nashville. So they had over 200,000 paying customers for that year to see wrestling in their main home city.
And that's what's reported.
Yeah, that's what's reported. Right.
That's right. That's right. That's what reported for the tax rolls.
In 1969, in September alone, for 1 month in Birmingham, they sold 16,750 tickets for a 5-week month. And overall, they sold 200,000 tickets for a year in 1969 in Birmingham, Alabama. In Memphis, they were never going to replicate what they did in 1959. It's 10 years later from the Sputnik Monroe, Billy Wicks transformational feud that really brought Memphis from the ashes up to the heights that it reached, drawing 15 and 16,000 to ballparks, and integrating and eliminating the segregation, starting to eliminate the segregation in Memphis. They were never going to have a year like that again. The Ellis Auditorium would hold somewhere around 7,000 people, 8,000 people. But in 1969, they also drew 200,000 people for a year. I think they drew about 226,000, as a matter of fact. So there's Memphis going over the 200,000 ticket a year mark. Chattanooga probably was their best town in 1969. And of course, we went over that earlier in the series. They partnered with Harry Thornton in 1962. He was a huge media celebrity, and he was on television every single morning in the Chattanooga market, and was for over 25 years. And he was the host of the wrestling show, and he was the local promoter for Chattanooga. And in Chattanooga, they got close to 250,000 tickets in 1969. Wow. And Chattanooga was a hot town for them right then.
And they're running weekly, right?
Yeah, they're running every week at Memorial.
So right at 5,000 people a week for the show.
Memorial Auditorium held about 6,000, 6,500. I mean, they got 63 in there once. They shoehorned 6,300 into Memorial Auditorium, but probably on average they drew about 5,000.
Yeah,
every week. And that was the thing about
that's what's so remarkable about it. You know, when you talk about Jerry Lawler, you know, the run he had, you talk about like guys like Bruno Sammartino, you know, same, selling out the Garden 186 straight times. Those records, I mean, they may be broken someday by somebody, but it's going to take somebody that's special like Sammartino or Lawler to do it, because you can't sell out the same city 52 weeks a year with the same person unless that person is just a once-in-a-lifetime freak. And that's what Jerry Lawler and guys like Bruno Sammartino were.
Yeah, and you know, it was just a different business model. There was a different business model on the East Coast. Vern in the AWA, he had a different business model, and then everything south was a different business model. Up on the East Coast, that business model was run a big town once a month. And, you know, you had Bruno in Pittsburgh and Boston and Philadelphia and New York and those towns. He didn't work the Bangor Mains and, you know, those, you know, the next level babyface was the main event. Probably Chief Jay Strongbow in the mid-'70s was the big babyface that ran the B towns. But the A towns were once a month, and they were drawing, you know, 15, 16, 18, sometimes in the Felt Forum there in Madison Square Garden, you know, they draw 22,000 for one show. Wow. But in Vern's territory, he had probably 18 to 20 cities that he ran once a month over a large geography, everything from Minneapolis to Denver. But in the South, you had the same town every single week, week after week after week, 52 weeks a year, and all the buildings were just, for Southern wrestling, they were built about right to hold about 5,000 or 6,000 people. And if you sold out 5,000 or 6,000 people on a weekly basis for 52 weeks a year, as you just said, you're doing something.
Yeah, you're doing something that is just almost impossible to replicate. You know, today it takes a lot of things to do that. It takes great storytelling, but it also takes incredible characters, you know, that people want to see, that people don't get tired of, and that's hard to do. there's only three things you can do in a wrestling match. One guy wins, the other guy wins, or some type of disqualification. So it's not like there's a million things you can do. It's tough to draw like that. And these Southern towns that were drawn, it's kudos to guys like Roy Welch, to Nick Goulas, and certainly guys like Jerry Lawler, Jerry Jarrett. I mean, it's a remarkable story.
And Roy would always say, he was always saying, I don't care where you are or what you're doing. You could just be walking down the street one day and look across the street and see two guys getting into it. You're going to stop and watch it. And especially if it's a little bit of a mismatch. If it's a big guy versus a smaller guy, you're going to stand there and watch it and kind of think, well, that little guy there, he might have a chance, and they'll grab your attention right away. So he understood from Dutch Mantell in West Texas that people naturally want to see combat. They want to see humans engaged in some kind of struggle. And then wrestling puts emotion on top of that.
Hey, Jerry, how many times have you heard Vince McMahon say the same thing about survival of the fittest and the Serengeti and all that crazy shit he had talked about?
That was part of his weekly speech.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Ron Fuller, I love Ron Fuller. I sent a clip of this to a bunch of guys who are promoting rugby, trying to get it going. I don't think they watched it enough because they didn't follow his advice. But he was talking about it the first time he saw a hockey game, and it was kind of boring. Hockey sometimes no scores. If you're not into hockey, it can be boring, even though when it's very technical. And he said all of a sudden two guys just got into it, looked at each other. They dropped their gloves. The whole crowd gets up, and everybody's into this. And all of a sudden they see this fight. He's like, oh, my God, this is made for the South. And that's when he brought hockey down.
Yeah, because in the South, we didn't really know that much about hockey. I remember when I first moved around St. Louis, and we lived in around St. Louis for 25 years. And when I first went up there, I mean, everybody was blues crazy, about the St. Louis Blues. And they were saying, well, we got to take you to a hockey game. You like hockey? And I'm like,
I don't know.
I don't know, man. When we had the freezing water in the farm, we cut it so the cows could drink. I don't know anything. We never got and played with a puck on it or anything like that, So, I mean, it just wasn't something that was there. But Ron understood he wasn't going to be able to take just the hockey game. He was going to have to put some showmanship into it. And
now because of Ron, hockey has taken over Canada and the South. There, our good friend up there in Canada won't like me saying this.
Yeah, Greg Oliver. He doesn't.
The hockey capital of the world is down in Florida.
That's right. Florida is the hockey capital of the world. Bigger than Russia, bigger than Canada, everything. Florida is bigger than all of it. Greg Oliver. I hope he hears that.
Greg Oliver. Yeah.
But I've heard, Ron's told me, and Jimmy Golden has told me, and I haven't really talked to Robert, but I've heard and seen Robert in interviews tell something similar where they'd just be riding down the road with Roy in a car, and they're just, small kids. And my grandfathers, both of them, they sort of played with me this way too. They didn't quite play this rough, but I mean, I remember my grandfather would get me in a headlock, and he'd give me the rub on the head, with his knuckles.
A noogie, give you a noogie.
Yeah, give me that, Well, Roy, they're driving down the road, and Roy would just reach over and slap him in the chest, really hard. And Roy had a hard slap.
And, that became a tradition of wrestlers anyway during the road times. You're just out, you're starting to doze off, the driver kind of see you nod, and everyone, he'd just wait. All of a sudden, boom, it just popped you. Right, John? I mean, I'm sure.
Oh, my God.
I'm sure Murdoch did that to you more than a few times.
And knocked the shit out of you. I mean, it wasn't a little love tap. It was a tap. Murdoch loved to call it a tap, but it was, but when he tapped you, it hurt.
I mean, that goes back all the way.
And guys would love that. Guys would literally wait for you to go to sleep so they could. I mean, literally, you know how it was, Jerry? They'd sit there and they'd watch you. And Rob, when you just start to doze off,
Whoa.
That goes back.
And then back up, man.
And then they'd ask you, "Are you asleep?"
Not now. That goes back not just to the beginnings of the traveling wrestler, but cars. I mean, the first part of the 30s, and Roy doing that all the way down to the 60s and 70s. He's got his grandkids riding in the car, just reach over and slap them. And he had a hard slap.
And there ain't no love tap involved in it, brother.
No, I mean, we've talked about Roy's dairy farm and his 8 harvest store silos and his 1,000 head of cattle and the big dairy farm that his wife ran for him, Bobby Welch. And Roy's out on the dairy farm one day out in the barn with Ron and Robert, and they're out there, and they've got this little. I mean, almost every barn had them where you'd have a pen, and then you'd have a place where you could get up in the loft and walk around the pen and look down in the pen, right? And Roy always had Brahma bulls. He didn't have dairy bulls. He had the Brahma bulls. And he wanted tough dairy cows in the breeding process.
What a tough cow, man.
Yep. And so, well, they got to have them for the wild cow milking in the rodeo.
Yeah.
So the Brahma bull's in there, and he's stomping and snorting around and this, that, and the other. And Roy's messing around. Of course, he got a limp by this time. He's got a worn out hip from all the body slams and all that from all his wrestling in the hard wrestling rings they had. And he walked with a cane or a walking stick. Well, somehow or another, he ended up falling in the pen with the bull. And he's laying there on his butt looking at the bull, and the bull's looking at him, and all of a sudden the bull starts coming toward him, and he sticks his nose up there, and Roy just hauls off and smacks the bull and knocks the bull back on the bull's ass. And the bull's back there, shaking his head. And anyway, they got Roy out of the pen. But I mean, this is what kind of guy this is. I mean, just slapping the Brahma bull, in the barn stall. So, I mean, that's the kind of resilience and the kind of energy that flowed through this family, which I'm sure goes back to Roy's father, Big Ed, back in Oklahoma, which was a pretty tough customer. He was a labor organizer in the oil fields. He was a wrestler back when you had to be extremely tough.
Boy, if he was a labor organizer in the oil fields, he was a hated man.
Yeah.
I got newspaper stories of him organizing meetings and getting
those guys hated for those roughnecks to organize.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you can see where this runs in the family, right? Where it's like, and Roy was very, very good at getting guys to work for him and be loyal to him. And he had his group of guys that were very close to him. And as a kid, he watching his dad do this, out in Oklahoma. And so that moved on down to his son, Buddy, moved on down to his grandsons, Jimmy Golden, Robert Fuller, Ron Fuller, and it's moved on down to their sons too. And as we get into next week's episode and when we have Ron come on, we want to make sure and mention that generational thing has gone on, past Jimmy and Ron and their sons. Ron told me he wanted his son to have at least one match so he could say that the generational thing went on. So, I mean, that's how much pride they have in what the wrestling business has meant to them.
Did he have the match?
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
Sure did. Well, when you have this kind of power and you're in this kind of business that's federally regulated, well, you got the athletic commissions in there. We'll talk a little bit about the athletic commissions again today. You've got to have some political clout. You've got to have some political power. There's going to be money that changes hands. There's going to be a lot of what people would call shady dealings going on. And in the 60s, I'll just talk about this just briefly here a little bit before we move on into the 70s. But in the 60s.
But before you get into the character and the politician involved, I mean, we need to get into him a little bit too.
Yeah, Roy and Nick got in trouble. They got charged in 1960. The Department of Justice had their nose in the wrestling business in the mid-50s to the early 60s.
And that was because monopoly?
Yeah, because of the National Wrestling Alliance and because of the allegations that a lot of wrestlers had made about the blackballing and the labor misuse and all of that kind of stuff. And the lawsuits that were brought by Sonny Myers and Antone Leone and all those different characters back in those days that were bringing these lawsuits against the National Wrestling Alliance and the different promoters for these unfair labor practices. And the Department of Justice had investigated the National Wrestling Alliance, and Sam Mushnick is the only reason they sort of navigated through that and survived. And so at the late 50s, early 60s, the Department of Justice had their eye on wrestling. And even in Tennessee, where they charged Roy and Nick with conspiring to halt an investigation because they were supposedly, and they were, making payments to a senator in Tennessee, Estes Kefauver. And I guess maybe he didn't get paid one day or one week. His bag didn't come. And so he sort of complained and said they were trying to interfere with the investigation, into his investigation into Tennessee. Now, Kefauver was a former amateur wrestler, and he had already had ties to Roy and Nick through the NWA, and those connections are in all kinds of little snippets of history that are here, there, and everywhere. And eventually the investigation went away, as all the scrutiny of the National Wrestling Alliance did.
That bag arrived on time this time.
That's right.
But I think the bag came and the zipper came open, and there was the greenbacks, and all of a sudden the investigation
makeup payments.
And Kefauver too, he was involved in some of that. It's interesting. We're never going to know the real answer of what happened there in 1960 and 61 in Memphis. And I got another piece to that puzzle coming up here in just a second. But I wouldn't be surprised if Kefauver didn't have his hands in that too, manipulating that whole situation where they're selling the ballparks out and making a ton of money in Memphis. All of a sudden now everybody kind of was struggling around wanting in on that, right? And I think Kefauver probably had a hand in that too, which eventually cost Buddy Fuller his license in Memphis. But anyway, one of the guys who was one of the bag men to have taken money back and forth to Roy and Nick was Don Pruitt. And some people who are watching this today, if they're older than I am, kind of know the name Don Pruitt from Western Kentucky. He was a guy that was mainly in Owensboro and around here. He promoted Owensboro for a while for Nick and Roy, while Jerry Jarrett was still in high school. And he was promoting spot shows with a hardship driver's license. Nick and Roy thought Don might be taking some of the money and skimming some of the money off of the spot shows and the house shows. And some of the guys that they normally trusted to bring the bag back to Nashville were working somewhere else. So they decided to send Jarrett over there to get the money from Don Pruitt and check up on things and do the house count and all that. Don was promoting.
Tony, I got to cut you off here for just a minute. I'm so sorry, but this is remarkable. You got a 16-year-old kid that's going to do a house count and figure out where he's stealing money from an arena from a carny dude that's stealing money. That's pretty remarkable that he felt that comfortable with Jerry Jarrett. Says a lot about Jerry Jarrett.
Two carny dudes sending a kid over to another carny dude.
Yeah. That's right. Hey, stop him from stealing. Figure out how he's stealing.
Now, I throw this in about Jerry, and something I didn't mention before, but one of the things that Jerry would do, he's Christine Jarrett's son, and we kind of talked about her long-term relationship there in the office. And hardly probably anybody was trusted more than Christine by Nick and Roy both. And her son has been working there. He's been promoting spot shows around there from the time he's about, he started taking tickets in Nashville when he's 9 or 10 years old. He starts running spot shows when he's 13 or 14. He got a hardship driver's license. He's probably not even 16 yet. And Jerry would sit in the office next to Nick and Roy's office, and he would listen to them work wrestlers. And Roy was always the good cop, and Nick was always the bad cop. And Roy would tell Nick what he wanted done before the wrestler came in, and then Nick would be the bad guy, and Roy'd sit there and smile and say, "Oh, now don't be so hard on the guy, maybe we ought to give him a break." And Roy done told Nick he's going to fire him, but he'd make Nick do the firing. And so Jerry has heard all this, right? And so Jerry goes in to talk to him, to talk about him running spot shows and talk about the cut of money he's going to get for the spot show. And they go into their routine. And Jerry goes, "Hey, wait a minute. Now, this is a 14-year-old, 15-year-old kid talking to these two dudes." He's like, "Now, wait a minute, guys. I know how y'all work is. And I know, Nick, you play the bad guy, and Roy, you play let's just forego all that and just come down to an agreement." And they respected him for that. And they started trusting him and started giving him these responsibilities. And he promoted he promoted spot shows all over Southern Kentucky. And not a lot of wrestling was done back then in Southern Kentucky. They ran Bowling Green, but they didn't run a lot of others. And Jerry was promoting all this. And it would eventually turn into him, as we get in today's episode, it eventually becomes a major part of his territory because he's so familiar with the Kentucky part of the territory. So anyway, it goes over to get this house count and settle up with Don Pruitt and all of this stuff, you know. And Pruitt sees this coming, right? And he thinks, I'll get my wife and my girlfriend to distract this kid, you know. So she's Jerry kept saying, let's get together and let's do the count and let's get this all settled up. I need to go back to Nashville and take this money back home. I don't want to stay here all night. Well, she keeps stalling him. And she says, well, I think Don's back here. And they did the spot show in high school. And so she leads him down the hallway saying, well, Don's back here in a classroom. He's got that set up for an office and he's got everything, the tickets and the money and all that back there. Well, they go back there and all of a sudden Jerry hears a door slam behind him. And he realizes she's gone. He's been had. She shut the door, locked him off into a part of the high school, and looks out the window and sees Don Pruitt driving out, throwing gravel out the driveway in his car with all the gate money.
Yeah.
But you know the audacity of that? I mean, he's blatantly stealing money at this point. I mean, it's no longer, hey, the count is a little off.
Maybe. It's no longer maybe, right?
So, yeah, now I've got all your money. I'm locking you behind the door, and I'm taking off with your money.
And so Don Pruitt's out for a while after that, right?
For a while. See, that's what kills me about this. How is he out for a while?
Well, John,
who would bring this guy back?
John, you got these promoters, these town promoters, these guys like Mike Maroney and guys like Colonel Herb Langston and all of these guys, they'd get in trouble with the commission in a town. Roy would just move them around. He'd say, okay, you go do Owensboro for a while, and you go down and you do Flatbush, Tennessee for a while. And then they'd go down there for a while, and then they'd get in trouble, and he'd move them all, juggle them around again to a different town. And they'd have to apply for their promoter's license in a different town, and they'd get it. And he was constantly doing that all the time with these guys. And so Pruitt's out for a while. He'll be back at some point. But it's just a little glimpse into how the wrestling business was working here in the late 60s.
How many?
Now, I'm going to jump in. John, you probably heard this saying, but you probably didn't know where it come from. And I really didn't until I was reading Tony's fantastic note about Pruitt. He was the one that gave away the pony ever show, right?
Yeah.
Now, he had a son, and his son's name was Blue. And ever show, and my boy Blue, that's where Jim Cornette.
Guess who won the pony?
Yeah, my boy Blue. Jim Cornette told that story at a production meeting one time with Vince, and every time we do something with Shane, and my boy Blue, Vince would say, my boy Blue. So
really?
Yeah.
That's, oh my God.
The promoter
my
would drop.
boy Blue, and all the guys from the South would say, "Yeah, my boy Blue won the pony again today."
You know, on the Will Ferrell movie that had the "My Boy Blue," you know, old school, whatever it was. I mean, that you don't know was that phrase? Did that phrase come from that?
I'm sure it did. I mean, because
my boy Blue,
he'd have the pony in a raffle, right? And he'd pull out the raffle ticket. Guess who won the pony? You know, my boy Blue.
My boy Blue. Oh my God, that's great.
Yeah, well,
so they're all criminals.
Well, they write bad checks. Don Pruitt was writing bad checks to
that's the definition of criminal.
No, John, not a wrestling promoter.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, you know, the last straw for Don Pruitt was he had a spot show and for a high school baseball team, and he gave the baseball coach the team's cut, then left without paying the guys. And that, you know, Roy could take, you know, being cheated, but he didn't want the guys to be cheated. So
he could take Blue winning a pony overnight, but he didn't want
my boy Blue. My boy, that's great. My boy Blue.
Yep. And Harley Race.
So Vince would call
Harley
Race, my boy Blue.
Harley
my
Race.
Boy Blue, yeah.
That is awesome.
Harley Race worked as Jack Long on that show, by the way. He was part of that crew that he didn't get paid. And he went to the sheriff's office to press charges against Don. And evidently they tried to track him down for a year or two after that. But as so many wrestlers filed charges against him, he finally moved on and wasn't back in the Goulas Welch company anymore.
Do you ever know where he went?
I probably do, but I can't remember off the top of my head, John. But it's a notorious name around here for older
Probably
people
Fort
that remember.
Leavenworth.
Yeah, yeah. Don Pruitt is a dirty name around here with a lot of older people for sure.
Needed
Well,
Gary Hart and Sweet Lucy is what you needed.
Yeah. Well,
That would get you your money.
Which brings me another guy who you could probably hear all the kinds of stuff about Memphis wrestling, but in just a very few places you might see this guy's name, but not very often. But in the late 1960s, toward 1970, there started to be three names on the Memphis advertisements for the show. It would be wrestling presented by Roy Welch, Nick Gulas, and Bert Bates. And Bert Bates was a longtime politician in Memphis. He goes back to the 20s, and he was a political enemy of a guy named E.H. Crump. E.H. Crump is the Tennessee governor and Memphis mayor that established the Athletic Commission. And they were political enemies. And after Crump retired, he supported Bert Bates's political foe, and they had a lot of political battles back and forth. But Bert Bates was a former veteran. I believe he was in World War I, if I remember right. And so he was very active in the American Legion. The American Legion, of course, was the main sponsor for wrestling in local towns. And we covered this in previous episodes where you had to have a nonprofit organization tied in with your wrestling show in order to be licensed to have that show in a lot of states, particularly in Tennessee. And in Tennessee, in Memphis, it was American Legion Post number 1. So this is the most powerful American Legion Post in the country, in Memphis. And the guy who's at the top manipulating and very powerful in American Legion Post number 1 is Bert Bates. And so Bert Bates, when I think about that whole license deal in Memphis in 1961, where Buddy Fuller eventually lost his license, I can't help but think American Legion Post number 1 is in there somewhere, because the Athletic Commission is toying with all the wrestling people. So Nick and Roy's license gets put in suspension, which is a booking license and a promotion license. So they were a license to promote the town and a license to book wrestling in the city of Memphis. That gets put into suspension. Buddy gets banned, and so does Les Wolf, who had been the promoter before, which I didn't know this when I talked about this before, but when I talked to Ron Fuller, he was telling me that Buddy and Les Wolf were pretty good pals. And Les Wolf ended up going down to Georgia in the mid-'60s when Buddy went down there to be partners with Ray Gunkel. Les Wolf went down there to promote some towns also. Well, the two guys who get suspended and cannot run with wrestling in any way are Buddy and Les. However, they do give them opportunity to apply for the license and the booking license. So here for a little short period of time, you got Nick and Roy and Buddy and Les, all four applying for this license in Memphis and battling over it. But American Legion Post number 1 is in there because they're the sponsor who has to be involved for whoever runs the town. So it makes me wonder if Bert Bates didn't have something to do with this, because at the end of the 60s, he ends up being a partner with Nick and Roy in Memphis. So he, I'm sure, used his political maneuvering in his later years to, along with his son, Guy Bates, I think it was his son, it might have been some other kind of relative, but it was Bert and Guy Bates. They became very, very powerful there, and they were co-promoters with Nick and Roy in Memphis because of Bates' political pull in the town. And that, I'm sure, helped them navigate a lot of regulatory and building challenges and a lot of that kind of stuff, because again, they've gone from drawing 500 people in 1958 to now drawing over 200,000 people a year. Somebody somewhere with some power is going to want a piece of that. And that guy turned out to be Burt Bates.
Yeah, it sounds like Bert, there's so much in dealing with this. When you're dealing with a cash business like this, you got so many people stick their hands in people's pockets, and that's it's going on everywhere.
And so,
I
John,
tell you, John, on Wednesday morning, Tampa would always run on Tuesday nights. On Wednesday morning at the Sportatorium, before the guys ever came, we did our TV on Wednesday morning. Before the guys would ever arrive, there'd be a lineup of politicians coming in just to say hello to Eddie. Yeah, yeah, you just want to say hello, Eddie.
Oh, what a bunch
they
of
all leave
scumbags.
with a smile on their face, too.
What a bunch of scumbags.
Which, John, if you look in your email, I sent you a photo of Nick, Roy, and Burt Bates.
I was wondering if that was what I was looking at. I had it right here.
And Roy is sort of kicking Burt Bates in the ass there in the photo.
Is that it right there?
That's it. Then you see Nick and Burt got each other hugged up there, and Roy's kind of kicking Burt in the behind and got a big grin on his face. And
so that's Roy behind Burt with the glasses on, right?
Yeah, Roy.
What's that? An envelope he's passing? He might have a smile on his face for an envelope for that big.
The numbers were probably big enough Burt didn't need his glasses.
I mean, just criminals. They're just freaking criminals.
Openly, true, John. Not behind closed doors, but
it's his name's on his name's on every newspaper ad for wrestling.
Yeah, because they got a big ego. They want to have their name out there, and they want to get the money.
At the beginning part of the 60s, it's Nick, Roy, and American Legion Post No. 1 present. At the end of the 60s, it's Nick, Roy, and Burt presents.
Wow.
Kind of crazy. But, I mean, they had that kind of leverage in every town. I mean, they were in with the local media celebrity who typically hosted the television show, and they were in with the power players for that town. They were going to gubernatorial inaugurations in the state of Tennessee and Alabama. I mean, they were leveraging their political leverage, and why not? I mean, when you hear how much money they're making at the end of 1975, I mean, you're going to have some stuff you got to deal with.
I live here in D.C., or right in the D.C. area. I live in Bethesda, Maryland, but it's essentially D.C. area. I mean, I'm surrounded by crooks. I mean, absolute freaking crooks that are in Congress. They're criminals, but it's no different than what they were 50 years ago.
No.
I mean, they've always been this way.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're dealing with structure and politics, I mean,
and a cash.
Yeah, cash, money.
Yeah. That's why a lot of these arenas now are going to credit card only. Have you seen that, Jerry? You go to these arenas, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't use cash.
Yeah, they're cash free. All the arenas down here are cash free arenas.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of arenas lately. You can't use cash, and dude, everybody's a thief.
Well, and it's not like back in these days either, where the tickets are counted and sent to the athletic commission. That's all gone now. It's all computerized and electronic. And
athletic commissions can steal a lot easier now.
Yeah. Well, crypto.
That's right.
Yeah. So I mean, there's just a lot of politics involved with all of this, and I don't know if you hate them or admire them, but pretty impressive, I mean, the way they navigated it all.
I love the wrestling guys. I hate the politicians.
And they had to go hand in hand. So
yeah, but now when it was they're selling 500 tickets a year, the politicians didn't show up.
Yeah, right.
It's when they're selling 200,000 tickets a year that the politicians show up.
Yeah. Just stop by to congratulate you and offer you some protection.
That's right. That you don't need.
So let's talk about another branch of the family. We haven't talked about the Goldens. I mentioned Bill Golden a little bit in our previous episode when he was down. He started out in Dyersburg. He married Roy's daughter Ruby, and the Golden family's an interesting family, and I really want to learn a lot more about them. And before we started doing this series, I didn't know hardly any of the stuff I'm about to tell you, but Bill was one of 5 brothers. He had Thomas, Bill, Phil, Moody, and Bobby, and a lot of wrestling historians have, of course, heard of Bill and Phil. But their father, Grandpa Golden, that's Bill Golden right there.
Bill.
That's Jimmy's dad.
I knew Bill. Yeah.
which a lot of people probably have never seen Jimmy Golden's dad, Buckhouse Bunk's dad, but that's his dad. He was a
Big, impressive man. He was.
he
Was
he
he a
had,
tall guy?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like Jimmy. Jimmy's a big tall kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Phil's father, Grandpa Golden, he'd been a World War I veteran. He also later owned a grocery store, had a nice farm in Tennessee. All the brothers worked at one time or another for the Illinois Central Railroad very early in life. Bill went to World War II, and he was a tank crewman under General George Patton in the Third Army. And he went to Europe and fought in all those famous battles you've heard of. When he got there and he was deployed into the battles and into a war, he was riding along the side of a tank. He was a tank crewman. He's riding alongside of a tank one day. They met some soldiers coming back from the front from the battles that had been going on, and one of the soldiers handed him a bottle of alcohol and said, "You're going to need this where you're going."
Yeah.
And this is Bill's first exposure to alcohol, and he would have a problem with that for the rest of his life. And for all the terrible, awful things. I mean, anybody who's ever seen that series, Band of Brothers, all the terrible, horrific things those guys witnessed in those World War II battles trying to free Europe, Bill Golden was right there and saw all that. He married Roy's daughter in 1949. They had a son in 1950, which is our guy, Jimmy Golden, that we talked about. And then Bill goes to work for Roy. After he worked for the railroad for a while, he went to work for Roy in the Dyersburg office in the late 50s. He tried working out in the ring a couple of times, but taking bumps just wasn't for him. He was a little bit more cut out for promoting and booking, and he had a penchant for that. Roy saw some talent in him for booking wrestling, so he gave him the Dyersburg, Tennessee territory to book and promote, and he refereed some in some of those towns. But his drinking was a continual issue, and it constantly caused heat between him and Roy. And of course, it caused an issue with his marriage between he and Ruby, and eventually they ended up getting a divorce, which caused even more heat with Roy. His son-in-law has turned out to be an alcoholic, and his daughter's complaining about the stuff, and they end up splitting up. And Bill then would go to Louisiana to run the Louisiana office in Lafayette, Louisiana, and promote there for Layfield, kind of as an extension of the Nashville office. Yeah, and the Gulf Coast office in Mobile. And there he uses the name Dixie Wrestling. 1964, he's running about 300 shows a year in Alexandria, Morgan City, that great town, Opelousas, that Jerry worked.
The crawfish capital of the world, by the way.
And he had a really hot feud down there with the Dalton brothers, which was Don Fargo as Jack Dalton and Jim Dalton, and the Fields brothers, Bobby and Lee. He had another big program with Dick Dunn and Terry Garvin. In 1964, he's selling tickets for $1.50 ringside, $1.25 reserved, general admission $1.50 for children. They sold Louisiana to Leroy McGurk in 1968, and Nick, and I was going to preface this by saying Nick Goulas always seemed to have problems with anybody that was close to Roy, except Bill Golden. And I don't know if Nick did. I mean, he was a gruff, rough, potty mouth, tough dude, but he had a heart at times. And there are several people that have stories about how Nick helped them out when they were down or whatever. And I don't know if it was that Nick felt bad for Bill about what had happened to him, but he knew Bill had talent, and they had the central Alabama towns that they needed a promoter for. And so Nick called Bill Golden and asked him if he'd like to go down there and promote Central Alabama for the Nashville office. And people say that Bill had a great saying about booking wrestling. He said, "You can't plow a field if you ain't got any mules," meaning if you ain't got talent, you can't draw money. And he lived in Montgomery, Alabama from about 69 to 75, carved out a little office and territory there, running Montgomery, Tuscaloosa, Selma, and the other towns he could put together in spot shows, and made pretty good. He had that going pretty good there until 75. but he had this alcohol problem, and it continued to plague him and cripple his life and his career. He had his ups and downs, and mostly some downs due to his drinking, and caused him a lot of health problems. He ended up having open heart surgery. He had a great business going there, but the drinking really limited his life and caused him a lot of issues. And he passed away in 1997. He gave up Central Alabama in 1975 to Dennis Hall and Buddy Wayne, the Tennessee Buddy Wayne, not the Portland Buddy Wayne.
Jerry, did you know Bill Golden very well?
Yes, matter of fact, I stayed in his trailer with him and Jimmy for like 3 or 4. When Leroy sent me down there, I was young, I didn't have any money. Bill really liked me, and of course Jimmy was a kid at the time, so I became friends with him, and so Bill asked me to stay. He said, "You don't need a place to stay. You can stay with me until you get on your feet." So I really liked the guy, respected the guy, and like I said, he opened his door to me. So
That's cool.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So you had a good feeling about him. Treated you well.
Yeah. Treated me well. Great.
Yeah.
Bill's brother Phil was interested in the wrestling business, of course, and he and Bill were close. And Bill, of course, introduced him. He's, of course, in with the Welches, and so Roy, from time to time, would do these just things that people would shake their head at, like the whole Memphis deal with Buddy and all of that. And Roy brought Phil in and I've always suspected this, but I never really knew it for sure until I talked to Jimmy, that Phil was a promoter for Roy in Dyersburg in Tennessee, and Roy set up Phil to run against them. He gave him the opportunity to go to Paducah, Kentucky. Saul Weingroff had fallen out with the Nashville office, and he partnered with Saul, also a loyal Roy Welch guy, and they started a promotion called All Star Wrestling. And they did a live studio wrestling show. It's one of the first wrestling shows I ever saw as a 9-year-old kid in Paducah on WDXR television with Buzz Benson as the announcer. And Buzz had been one of the announcers on the Gulas Welch TV show in Nashville, and he sat in as the host for a while after Gil Green passed away. But it was interesting having a live wrestling show there in my memory as a wrestling fan. And he ran that old Tennessee territory. He ran Madisonville, Sikeston, Cape Girardeau, Paducah, Glasgow, and ran a little bit in Louisville when Gulas Welch was also running Louisville. He ran Owensboro when they were also running it. But I'd already always heard whispers that, well, Roy was doing that just to kind of keep Nick in check. And he'd every now and then when he and Nick were having a falling out, Roy would do something to show Nick that they were vulnerable. So this was kind of his way of running against Nick, even though they were partners in their office. But
so Roy is essentially running against himself.
He's running against 50% of his own company.
Yeah. Wow.
That's great.
Yep. And so for, 3 years, 72, 73, and 74, Saul has been with Roy going back to the 40s in Daytona Beach in Florida, where he was promoting with Roy way back then. And they're tight, and so Phil is tight and all. And I almost wonder if, again, going back to that whole episode about him setting up Mario Galento to whip Jerry Jarrett, to kind of keep Jerry Jarrett in line and teach Jerry Jarrett a lesson. I'm not sure Phil wasn't his other Jerry Jarrett, where he's like, okay, well, Jerry was running that part of the company over in Western Kentucky and out in that area. I'll just set up Phil and let them have it out, and we'll see who wins.
So Roy seems to me like a guy, and we worked for a guy like this one time, Mr. Brisco, that would control everything, but not let everybody else know what was being controlled over here. So
Right.
he would know what you're doing, Tony. He would know what you're doing, Mr. Brisco. He wouldn't want you two guys talking to each other,
Right.
because that takes him out of the equation.
And we'd put the picture
most
together.
important person in the middle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
And then we'd have the whole puzzle.
He didn't have the whole puzzle. So he didn't want you to see the whole house. It's kind of like they say about Goldman Sachs. They can see the whole house, while there's investors can just see like the living room or the den. They can see the kitchen, the bathroom. He wanted to see the whole house.
You bet. Yeah. No, that's a great way of putting it because that is Roy Welch to a T. But it was almost like he going back to that story I was telling earlier, where he's like, you know, you want to see the two guys go at it. Well, he was doing it with promoters, you know, and watching them, you know, kind of go at it, knowing he's going to win either way.
He gonna win.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Well, Phil, you know, he had a really good run. They ran Charleston, West Virginia for a while. I mean, they had a pretty good thing going there. It probably peaked out in late '73. They had Von Brauners and Saul over there. He had Mario Galento. That's where Mario went to work after the attack on Jarrett, and he couldn't get back with Gulas Welch, so he went over and worked with Phil, essentially working for Roy. So it's interesting, and that's also the first place in Western Kentucky that Angelo Poffo shows up. And
now you what you said, it just strikes me. They were extremely loyal to the guys that were loyal to them. I mean, that was almost like a mafia type bond with these guys, and once they're on Roy's side.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. Well, Nick or whoever, they're thinking that they've gotten rid of Mario. Well, Mario's actually still working for them, but he's just working over there where they
Working
can't
for a
see.
different brother.
Yeah. And Angelo Poffo, you know, gets involved in that promotion as well, and it's actually the
There's
first time on.
Picture of
There's Angelo.
Angelo
Yeah.
Poffo.
Yeah,
Young Angel Poffo. Looks like Lenny there, doesn't he? Or Lenny.
yeah, it sure
it
does.
does.
Yeah. He, of course, he was the first big star for Jim Barnett when Barnett started the studio show in Cincinnati. He got incredible ratings there with the United States Championship back in the 50s during Barnett's promotion. And he comes in here, and he's got his sons with him. And the one son, Lanny Poffo, he wrestles. His first television exposure is here in 1973 on this television show, and a masked wrestler known as the Spider. And under the Spider mask is a young baseball player who's playing minor league baseball in the St. Louis Cardinal baseball system named Randy Poffo. So it was a early training ground for later on in the 70s when the Poffos would return to Kentucky and base a promotion out of Lexington called ICW. But it was that experience early on working for Phil Golden that gave them the idea that, hey, we could make a territory here. And after working at those first 2 or 3 years.
Now, was this the Spider?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That's
him.
the young Randy Savage right there.
Yep.
As the Spider.
I met the Spider in Fort Myers, Florida, when he was in spring training with the Cincinnati Reds.
He was working under a hood when he's in
works
spring
under
training?
a hood. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Really? So
that's why he worked under a hood.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't he wouldn't lose his amateur deal or whatever, and he wouldn't get in trouble with the baseball team.
That's
Also,
awesome.
he would get in trouble with the baseball team.
Yeah.
If Jim Thorpe would have done that, he wouldn't have lost his gold medals.
Yeah.
Even
worked under a hood and playing baseball.
Even after he was kind of done with baseball, his first couple of years in the business, he worked as Jim Pride. And he worked out in Amarillo as Jim Pride, and he did a job on WWF television in 1975 in Pittsburgh as Jim Pride.
Wow.
Then he became Randy Poffo toward the end of or Randy Savage toward the end of the 70s. And that's going to come in our next episode, in episode 8, too, by the way. Jimmy Golden, that's Bill Golden's son, as we all know him. He debuted in the late 60s in 1968 after being trained by Charlie Carr down there in Alabama on the ranch in Loxley. And also he worked with a guy named Pancho Villa in the Louisiana territory. Pancho Villa was married to Ann Laverne. And they
a badass Ann Laverne too, by the way.
Yeah, Ann Laverne.
Really?
She had two cauliflower ears.
Yeah, she had a
Really?
badass job. Yeah.
She had a cauliflower ear on each side. Ann Laverne.
Each side, yeah.
Yeah,
the women bitched like crazy about working with her, man. She was tough in the ring.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm friends with her daughter even today. She used to come to some of your guys. She used to come to Waterloo, but in her later years, she's decided not to travel. But Marie Laverne, Mary
There's
Nelson.
Ann Laverne there, right?
That's Ann Laverne.
Yeah, that's Ann. Yeah,
And she's tough, huh?
Yep.
she's badass. Yeah.
Yeah. And her grandson was the tough MMA Steve Nelson, who's Gordon Nelson's son. Gordon Nelson was married to Ann Laverne's daughter, Marie Laverne.
Jerry, where'd you work with Ann Laverne, or what territory were you in that she was
I
around?
went Oklahoma.
So Leroy
Oklahoma,
brought her in because
Louisiana.
she was a big shooter.
She was a badass. Yeah.
Who was she working
She
with?
had big cauliflower too, man.
What women was she working with?
Vern Bottoms and another lady that we've talked
Greatest
about.
name ever.
Vern and whoever was on the
Whoever was
tour
working.
there. Yeah, whoever was on the tour.
Yeah.
What's her background? Was she trained? Obviously, she was trained by a shooter. Anybody know?
I don't know.
Goes way back for
Yeah.
sure. Pancho Villa was her husband. Jimmy said
Now,
Pancho
Pancho,
Villa,
he was a wild ass guy too.
Pancho Villa used to wear him out, he said. And when he was just a teen coming up there in Louisiana.
He was one of those little wiry guys. I mean, Pancho Villa was just real wiry, just stronger than hell, but a great heel.
Yeah, you'll have to look for Pancho Villa, the wrestler, so you don't get the Mexican outlaw.
Yeah, they
guy.
get
The Mexican hero.
get the outlaw. Yeah.
Yeah. But, Jimmy got the world tag team title put on him in 71 with Dennis Hall as his partner. He had a lot of singles matches, a lot of tags. He worked for his dad a lot there in Alabama, of course. And it went on to be a huge.
Now, is that Pancho Villa?
I don't think so.
That don't look like Pancho. Pancho is more not clean shaven like that, right, Tony? I mean, he had
he was
wild ass beard, as you would.
Yeah, he
figure
was
a
more
Pancho would have.
scraggly. He was more scraggly. I got a picture of him here, but I can't show it, you guys. But
it's one of those pictures.
No, I just don't have the ability, technology-wise, to share it.
Now, is this a clean shaven Pancho Villa?
It looks like him a little bit.
Yeah, it's more Pancho there.
Yeah, I've used to seeing him with a sombrero and a scraggly beard. But,
That's before he got the Mexican independence in the
Yeah.
But he was a rough dude. He broke Jimmy in along with Charlie Carr. So Jimmy got broke in good. Ron Fuller, of course, that's Buddy Fuller's oldest son. Graduated as an all-state Georgia basketball player. It's Roy Welch's grandson, 1966. Got more than 500 rebounds in 24 games. Voted
That's
best
incredible. That's 20 rebounds a game.
Yeah.
I mean, that is insane.
Best athlete in Atlanta's
7'8",
high school.
So what?
Yeah.
He goes to school with over 3,000 students, and he's the best athlete in the high school, voted best athlete. He played for Clemson for a couple of years. Transferred in 1967 to the University of Miami, finished college there. Had a pretty good reputation growing up there in Loxley, Alabama. He was also broken in by Charlie Carr. He made his debut in 1968 in Blytheville, Arkansas with Buddy wrestling. Buddy was wrestling there as Ed Welch in that particular match. And they wrestled.
Tony, when Ron was at University of Miami and they were playing in the NCAA tournament, Buddy conceived an angle for Ron to do. I forgot the basketball player, but he went on to be McGinnis or something like. He went on to be an NBA superstar.
Oh,
but
I know
anyway,
who that is.
of course, the game was televised. Buddy wanted Ron to body slam him on a fast break. Wanted him body slam in the middle of the court.
I'm not surprised. I know who that is you're talking about too, and I can't think of his name.
But Ron Fuller, when he's in high school, I mean, he had to come in and shoot with some guys that were grown men, right? I mean,
He was, yeah.
Buddy would say, "Hey, we got a guy who wants to be a wrestler. Won't you wrestle my son?" And poor Raj is coming in, wants to go out and play basketball, and he's got to go shoot with some grown adult that wants to be a wrestler.
What I always admired about Ron was that he's so big, he still got over as a baby face.
Yeah.
He was a good looking athlete.
And
of course he did work heel some, but I mean, Andre's a big baby face, but I mean, he gets over because he's Andre. I mean, Ron got over really well in Florida, being a baby face at that size. I mean, you have to be really good to make your heel look good if you're that big. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when Ron, and I know he listens. Ron was in the ring at that time. He was uncoordinated as hell, but you could see that talent in him. But just those long, there's so many moving parts of that. 6'9", 7'9".
Yeah. Yeah, six
So
foot
many
nine.
moving parts at it. He just looked unorthodox in there, but he got over. He could sell like $1 million, and he could come back, of course, and he got over with the young ladies because he's a good-looking young man too.
Yeah, I can't wait for him to come on because I know we all got questions for him. You know, after we've done these 7, 8 episodes, we got a lot of
That's
things.
what's great. We've had Ron involved in all this stuff, kind of backing us up, and man, he's really enthused about this series. So.
Yeah, after debuting there, they debuted against that tag team we talked about here last week with Les, Don Carson and the Red Shadow. That was his first match, was with those guys. And Ron and Buddy lost the match, 2 out of 3 falls by disqualification. He went to Georgia for about the first half of 70. And then he made his debut in Florida in Orlando, stayed in Florida through the middle part of 71. He got the town from Eddie for West Palm Beach.
And John, I was going to throw that in. John, here's this guy just getting into the business to show you the respect that Eddie had for the Fullers. Eddie gave him part of West Palm Beach to promote 25%. I think he had of West Palm Beach. And that was,
really, and
when you went down there. This is Ron Fuller's house.
He just got in the business.
Yeah,
he just got in the business too.
Yeah, he's like 23 years old.
Yeah,
he just got into business, and by the middle part of 1971, he's the promoter for West Palm Beach.
And he did a hell of a job there too.
Which West Palm Beach was not doing well.
No, it wasn't, but it became one of our main towns after that.
I mean, pretty much everybody thought Milo Steinborn in Orlando on Monday night, that was the town, right?
Yeah.
And then West Palm Beach was the B town and not doing very well. But Ron, I mean, he moved it into the auditorium there in West Palm Beach and promoted a few spot shows around and did great. And we talk more about that with him.
And by the way, he was good at delving out envelopes too to local people.
Well, why not? I mean,
that tradition continued after he lost his percentage in the towns there. I know because I carried the bag a few times.
Oh, good grief! It's unreal.
And not only that, but he was spending a pretty good amount of time in the snake pit too in Tampa.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
So he was getting worked with
the Mad Sudas, the Nelsons, and some badasses there too.
Yeah, the Roops, all of those guys. So he was getting pretty good at you know. Of course, he grew up stretching marks. Yeah. You know, I mean, Buddy
would get slapped before ball game by his old man,
and by his granddad in the car.
And by the car.
and you know, Buddy, we talked about it before about Charlie Carr. You know, well, if you can beat my referee, you know, maybe you could be in the business. Well, he did that with his boys too. You know, he'd say, he did it with Ron and Robert, where they'd come in all ready to go out on a Saturday night date, and there's some dude that showed up there on the farm wanting to get in the wrestling business and goes, hey, take off your shirt there. Well, if you can beat my son, you can, you know, maybe you can show me something or whatever. And they'd stretch him, you know. And so by the time he gets to this age where he's 23, 24, he's going to the snake pit in Tampa, spending a lot of time there. And, you know, he's wrestling 250, 300 times a year there in his second year promoting West Palm Beach. I mean,
and getting over too, by the way.
I mean, no doubt that he would eventually get into other things beyond wrestling, you know, that had to do with ownership and promotion. I mean, he's off and running, you know, here with in one of the biggest NWA territories.
And so the Fuller, when was Rob? When did Rob break in?
He broke in the next year. He broke in 69, and he also was trained by Charlie Carr down there on the ranch in Loxley. And, you know, the thing is interesting to me, and I asked Jimmy about this, and I asked Ron about this too. I said, you know, until Robert came in there prominently in the Tennessee territory around 1972, but he was brought in by Jarrett. And Ron, of course, we're going to talk about him in just a little bit because he buys the town of Knoxville, and he's very prominent in the Tennessee territory kind of after that. But I said, how come you guys didn't work there more? And he said, well, we got the feeling, although no one ever said anything, we got the feeling Roy just wasn't too keen on us being there. So that's all part of that interesting relationship, you know, that Roy didn't never wanted Buddy to get into business to begin with. But finally, he lets him in. Then he sends him down to the Gulf Coast. He makes a big, huge go of it, carves out a territory, sells out everything, got ballparks filling up. Then he says, oh, well, let's see if he can do anything with Memphis. You know, we can't seem to get anything going here. He's got Sputnik and Wicks in the Rustwood ballpark at 17,000, 18,000 people. And then Roy sort of involved somehow or another with Buddy leaving again. And he goes to Arizona, makes Arizona go. He goes to Atlanta, which, by the way, if you want to know more about Buddy Fuller's transition, we covered all that in the Jim Barnett episodes of his partnership with Ray Gunkel in Georgia from the 1960s till the early 70s. And then he goes down and he's partners with Eddie in Florida because he and Uncle Lester, they changed ownership stakes there. He gave Lester Atlanta and he went to Florida. And then these guys come along, right? And then they start demonstrating the proficiency for the business. It's just amazing how it proves that things run in families.
Yeah, I've always said, you know, the second generation, anything is just has a better opportunity and a better mindset about it. You know, second generation wrestlers are generally better than first generation wrestlers. You know, there's just, you can look at them, and you know, there's a few that aren't, but most are, and that's what you see, I think, in this family as well.
There's an old saying
past second generation at this point, but
yeah, but there's an old saying that they sort of defy. I mean, there's an old saying in business, you know, first generation starts it, second generation grows it, third generation blows it. But they don't really. They actually keep it going and prosper. And, you know, Ron goes through some things we'll talk about a little bit later. But, I mean, he was very successful in the wrestling business.
Yeah.
Most of the time, by the time it gets to the third generation, there's issues. Like
right.
you said, John. I mean, second generation blows it up, right? And then the third generation kind of blows it out. That, in their case, that's not necessarily true. So another thing we talk about here that was very revolutionary that Roy Welch should get credit for, along with Nick Gulas, is the first in Tennessee and Alabama and this part of the South. It's the first integrated tag team, Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown. So not only are they very influential in Memphis in the segregation, getting rid of it there in Memphis with Sputnik Monroe, but they're very, very influential in affecting it in Birmingham, Alabama, which Birmingham is right in the center of the whole civil rights stuff going on in the 60s, and a very volatile town as far as racial relations. And Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown, they teamed them up, which a white man and a black man being tag team partners doesn't seem like a big deal now, but it was a big deal back then. And Matt Jewell, who was from Georgia and was a construction worker, they found on a construction site, thought he had some potential, broke him into the business, gave him a big push in 1969. And I can tell you, as a kid, man, Bearcat Brown was one of my heroes. I just thought he was amazing. And so in 1969, there they are.
Yeah, there they are, yeah.
1969, they put those two guys together. Lynn Rossi was right there with Jackie Fargo as being the biggest baby face of the 1960s in Tennessee. And they put him and Bearcat Brown together on purpose, I think. And Lynn Rossi has always said that Nick was very, very nervous about it and thought that it was really going to cause him a lot of consternation. And it did, because they went in there to Alabama, to the Birmingham venue, and they did well. They sold it out. They had drew a lot of crowds. They held a lot of championships. They also had a lot of death threats. They had a lot of blowback from the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan's out picketing the arena. They're talking about bombing the arena during the event. I mean, if you could, well, there's no way you could possibly put yourself in this position, but try to think about being a fan who wants to go see your favorite wrestlers wrestle at a building that has the Ku Klux Klan outside saying they're going to blow the building up.
Yeah. In
But
Birmingham, they'd already had some blow up buildings.
yeah, they had all kinds of stuff. I mean, they during that 1960s,
churches, everything.
That's right. George Wallace and Bull Connor.
The young children that all died in the church bombing, and George Wallace, like John said. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And Lynn Rossi, reflected on it in later years, saying, "I can't even believe I really lived through it. Like it was very terrifying." But
what a worker Lynn Rossi was, John. They were a perfect tag team. They set it up just right. Lynn was so over. Lynn would go out and sell, die, sell, tag Bearcat in. Bearcat, of course, come in and blow the roof down. It was a prototype of how mixed tag teams should be worked. And Lynn Rossi was one of the best of all time doing it.
Jerry, did you and Thunderbolt, because you're the first integrated tag team up in the Carolinas, did you guys have anything that dramatic as?
We had the office had a few phone calls, but nothing that dramatic. And we're talking 5-6 years later, but it's still the Carolinas. We'd still go into those towns, like I've told this story, North Wilkesboro, big sign up, and they weren't shy about it. Welcome to the home of Ku Klux Klan. Of course, that was Thunderbolt's opportunity to stay in the car and me have to buy the beer for the night.
Man, that's crazy. I mean, that's just kudos to you guys. I mean, for doing that and
we were called in the office. I was called in alone first by Jim Crockett Sr. and asked me if I had any issues with it. I said, "Jim, I'm a Native American. I have no issues being tagged."
That's right.
As long as I'm, in a good position there. He said, "Well, in that case, I'm gonna put you guys together." And then he asked Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt said, "Sure." Jack and Thunderbolt had worked together in Dallas, not as a tag team, but as both baby faces down there. So I called Jack. Jack said, "You'll love working with him. He's great." He said, "Just sell and set him up," and that was my routine too. Just sell and set Thunderbolt up. And Thunderbolt was so entertaining; it was unbelievable. And you would hear remarks, going and coming from the ring. But once that match started, Thunderbolt was so over that once he started, and then I'd make that tag. I mean, they were all on their feet. Come on, Boat. Come on, Boat. So it was so weird. John, you experienced it with Ron, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, and obviously we're several years later, but it was the same thing. Ron can make God Almighty, that Ron Simmons can make a comeback like you wouldn't freaking believe, man. Oh my God, he'd spine buster this, he'd power slam that. Guys like him and like guys like Billy Gunn. I mean, when those guys will make comebacks, you're just looking at it going, I don't know how that's art. Freaking art when they do that.
And
so fun to set up for your tag team partner. They can make a comeback like that.
Yeah.
And no matter the era or the decade or the time, there's ignorant, stupid people everywhere.
We had several times in the South with Godfather. Of course, Godfather was huge with tattoos all over this big man. He went up to the motel. We never stayed in hotels. We didn't have the money. And the guy said, "Sorry, we don't have any rooms." And so he came back and goes, "Send the white guy." So I go in literally right after him. I said, "Hey, have you got any rooms?" He goes, "Oh yeah, what do you need?"
Oh yeah, lots of them.
Yeah. Guy was just scared of Godfather.
Well, the good thing is no buildings exploded, but Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown did. I mean, that tag team blew up, and they were turning away thousands at the door. I mean, they were.
Hey, and Jerry, what's amazing? When Ron and I were there, you had the Dudleys, and you had Owen and Coco before that. But you didn't really have, natives were the natives, Europeans were the Europeans, Japanese, whites, blacks. Everybody was kind of, there weren't mixed hardly anything. You had Thunderbolt and you and Lynn Rossi and Bearcat back then. But it wasn't very common. Now it's really common. And I think that had a lot to do with, Ron and, certainly so entertaining. The Dudleys were entertaining. Then you had Booker and Goldust, who were incredibly entertaining. He had, and now people realize that, for whatever reason, wrestling was, the talent was segregated. I mean, somebody in the ring, I'm not talking about backstage. Backstage, I've always said wrestlers don't care. They don't care if you're gay,
Right.
straight,
Okay.
white, black. No, nobody gives it. They care if you draw money is what they care about.
That's all you
Yeah.
care about. Yeah.
That's right. It's one of the best environments that there can be in for the very most part. But it's interesting how
I think athletics in general is like that.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I do too.
That's right. If you're in athletics, you're a good chance that the racism starts going away because you realize everybody's
I grew up in a town in Oklahoma called Blackwell, Oklahoma. It was called one of those sunset towns, and you two are from the
Oh
south.
yeah,
And
I heard that all the time. The rumor when I was
town
growing up.
is, and so I'd never been to school until I got in the ninth grade with an African American, but I'd competed against them on the athletic field and on rushing mat. But going to school was no different going to school with anybody else, in my opinion.
Well, I think A players like to play with A players, and if you're on an athletic team and somebody else can help you win, that's automatically your best buddy. It's like, oh man, he's on our team, And I think like Jerry said, all of athletics are kind of that way. We don't worry about all that other stuff. It's just, you're helping us.
And you help me win. Yeah,
you're a plus to us. And I'm better off because you're here. That kind of thing.
And you're going to fight for them every time you have to.
That tag team of Bearcat Brown and Lynn Rossi, like I say, I mean, that was my favorite tag team when I first became a fan. And the only thing that stopped that tag team was a car wreck and put Lynn Rossi out of the business. Rossi had been a 14-time world tag team champion just working there in Tennessee from the late 50s all the way to 1972. The other two people in the other vehicles were killed in the car accident. And he, the next time, and I didn't remember, I don't remember seeing this when I was a kid, but there's been a tape that's been discovered of a Louisville studio live show. In one of the first studio shows they did in Louisville, and Lynn Rossi was the host of it, and he's got his arm in a sling. And he had his arm in a sling for several months after the car wreck, but he never came back. And they, again, used somebody else. They brought Joey Rossi in. And if George Goulas has gotten a lot of publicity for being a bad wrestler over the years, Joey Rossi would give him a run for his money. I mean, he was not very good at all. I never bought Joey Rossi as a wrestler, and I did cheer and buy for George Goulas when I was a fan. So if that tells you anything, but they teamed them up. They teamed up Bearcat Brown and Joey Rossi as a tag team, and that was fine. But it just wasn't Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then that wasn't the end of things. 1972, if Nick got a little bit of confidence over the fact that nothing bad happened except some rioting and some threats and all, but there was a lot of tickets sold, he did an angle on television where he took his other big heel tag team, Don and Al Green, and they tarred and feathered Bearcat Brown on live television. So they used the old syrup and feather thing, and they tarred and feathered him on TV. They attacked him and jumped him from off camera. And anyway, that led to a long, long feud that sold a lot of tickets with Don and Al Green. And they had a manager named Sir Dudley Clements. It's Sir Steve Clements here in Tennessee. He's Dudley Clements in Georgia. But he was their manager, and that was the blow off, as Sir Clements ended up getting tarred and feathered at the Fairgrounds Arena in Nashville. So they got their comeuppance, or at least what usually happened, the manager got the comeuppance.
That's right.
And then we got to mention too another integrated tag team that came along after Rossi and Bearcat Brown, and that's Sputnik Monroe and Norville Austin. Right. Another white and black wrestler team, and of course Sputnik, who will always be popular and known because of that fantastic run he had in Memphis. He never would have that kind of run again, but Sputnik and Norvell had a pretty nice run as a duo. Of course, they were heels, where Rossi and Bearcat were baby faces, but the coolest thing about that team was Austin putting the blonde streak in his hair like Sputnik, and they would get baby faces down in the ring and pour black paint on them.
Yeah,
there they are. Sputnik and Norvell.
Norvell. Yeah.
Norvell Austin is forgotten, and he shouldn't be. He was
He should
fantastic.
be. Yeah, he was.
He was really, really good. He was
What
actually
a nice guy too.
another thing a lot of people don't know is Norvell Austin was part of the three-man original Midnight Express tag team. Randy Rose, Dennis Condrey, and Norvell Austin.
Really? That's an interesting tidbit.
Yep. They were the original Midnight Express and down in Alabama, and then working for Jerry Jarrett. So it's kind of interesting because when Cornette and Condrey and Eaton showed up in Mid-South Wrestling in 1984, I'm like, oh, they're bringing back the Midnight Express gimmick, where a lot of people had never seen or ever heard of the Midnight Express before. But Rose and Condrey and Austin had been a tremendous heel tag team in Tennessee. Yeah, they pour black paint on their opponents. And Monroe, I mean, that got over big time because Monroe was such a champion for African Americans. And so by painting the white baby faces black in the ring, I mean, that didn't get anything but cheers and all. I mean, that was great. So we got to move into the Jerry Jarrett part of the evolution of the territory. And probably one of the most lasting things that ever happened in Tennessee was when they moved from Ellis Auditorium to the Mid-South Coliseum. And so they moved there. The first card was on June the 7th, 1971. Tojo Yamamoto, who Jerry Jarrett turned babyface to be his partner. They were probably the most popular tag team with the exception of Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown in the territory. They were against Don and Al Green, who were the big-time heels, and Sir Clements. They drew 9,253 people on the first show. And Nick Goulas was ribbing Jerry Jarrett and telling him, this is a mistake. We'll never sell that many tickets to that big-ass building. And from the very first day, the Coliseum capacity is about 11,500. And they sold 9,253 tickets on the first show.
Wow.
Now, they did have some blowback. There was a story that ran in the newspaper the next day in the Memphis Commercial Appeal that interviewed some of the fans, and there were some of the older fans that had gone to the Ellis Auditorium for years in that 6,000 to 7,000 seat building, and they sat ringside, and they were right up there on the ring. And now with the Mid-South Coliseum, they were a lot further back. Later on, they would install risers in there to make the seating a little bit better and make the view a little bit better for people. But they interviewed several people. There was a lady in the paper that was interviewed that said, I'm going to call the mayor of Memphis. I want to go back to the Ellis Auditorium. I can't see from my seat. I brought a sandwich with me in a bag. They wouldn't let me eat my sandwich. They said I had to buy food at the.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, yeah.
Bad as he trolls nowadays on the internet. Cry me a river.
It was.
Hey, and by the way, this the photo we couldn't figure out. Don and Al Green.
Yeah, that's Don Fargo though, and Al Green.
It's not the same Don and Al Green.
That's Al Green with the cowboy hat on, but the motorcycle hat wearing guy is Don Fargo. And Don Green is Don Fargo's manager in that picture. But Don and Al Green, there should be pictures of them out there. They were the original, get this, they were the original Heavenly Bodies.
Right.
Which was a funny rib because they didn't have heavenly bodies.
They didn't have bodies.
They had
most
them,
guys that had heavenly bodies gimmicks.
There wasn't no heaven.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there wasn't.
All right. Finally, I got them.
There they are. Don and Al and Clements.
Those are the heavenly bodies right there.
Yeah. And they had been big tag team there going back to the late 50s. We talked about them when the television show first came on in Nashville. They were big, them and the Fargos. They were the big heel tag team. And they stopped wrestling. They stopped using them in the mid-60s. And Jerry Jarrett found Don Green in a bar. Or actually, he went into the hotel where the Nashville wrestling office was located, and the bar in the lobby Don Green was sitting on a bar stool in the bar drinking. And Jerry Jarrett goes, "Hey, Don, what are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, not much call for old guys like us anymore, this, that, and the other." And Jerry essentially talked him to coming back into business, and they had a whole nother more successful run here. So you were asking me, what did Jerry Jarrett do when Les and all those guys walked out and left, and Mario left and all that? He did stuff like that. He went and found Don and Al Green. He
went to the bars and found a bunch of old wrestlers.
Yeah, well, man, this is Tennessee wrestling. You know, he's in there.
Where else you gonna find them, right?
Exactly. That's where you go to find them.
He's in there. I mean, we're gonna have Phil Hickerson here in a little while.
We need a card next week. Okay, go to happy hour.
Yeah, Phil Hickerson, who owned a bar in Jackson, Tennessee. I mean, he was, you know, he did that one famous interview where he said, "I'm going to beat your ass and buy me some good old Tennessee sipping liquor with it." You know, that's Tennessee wrestling, man. So he brings the Greens back. The other thing he does, which is extremely key.
Say that again, because I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna beat your ass and buy me some Tennessee
good old Tennessee sipping liquor.
Good old Tennessee sipping liquor.
Yeah, sipping liquor. Yeah.
I got it. Good old Tennessee sipping liquor. I'm going to steal that.
Yep. That's Phil Hickerson. The other thing Jerry did to fill in the void on the babyface side when those guys walked out was he went to talk to Jackie Fargo. Jackie Fargo essentially retired from the wrestling business in like 1967, 68. He went into business with a guy named Eddie Bond. He was a former country music artist. They bought a restaurant together. They had a sign company together. They bought a little radio station just outside of Memphis. And Jerry Jarrett brings up Jackie Fargo's name, and Nick Goulas is against it, which Jerry kind of figured out after a while, if I come up with an idea and Nick hates it, it's probably going to be a great idea. So he wants to bring Fargo in. Nick goes, he's been in the papers. Him and his wife have a big domestic dispute. He drinks too much. I mean, he had every reason not to do it. But Jarrett brought him back, and essentially they become known as the Iron Curtain. Jerry Jarrett, Tojo Yamamoto, and Jackie Fargo as a threesome. And they feud with the Mask Interns and the Von Brauners and Don and Al Green with Sir Clements and Saul Weingroff. Jackie Fargo beat Saul Weingroff for his hair in March of 1972 in a big feud. Now, the Fargo Green feud didn't erupt overnight. It sort of simmered throughout 1972 because the Greens were such big heels, and they were in tag team feuds. And that was the thing about Tennessee, too. There weren't just tag team guys and tag team guys. There were tag team guys, and they were in singles, and Jarrett was moving people around kind of like chess pieces on a chessboard. But Fargo and Green got into this feud that lasted for most of 72, and this is when I just start watching as a wrestling fan. And finally, in late summer of 72, after they have gone through a coal miner's glove match and a 6-man tag and all these different gimmick matches, Al Green comes out on television. I remember how this like it was yesterday. Al Green comes out on television and he says, "I'm going to put up my brother," which Don Green was the U.S. Southern heavyweight champion. He said, "I'm going to put up my brother Don's title, $5,000, and I'll leave the United States for 1 year if I lose to you, Jackie Fargo." Fargo comes out and goes, "All right, you put up your brother's title, $5,000, and leave the United States. I'll put up my hair." The fans don't know what's going to happen here because Don and Al Green ain't going to leave, are they? And he got to leave for a year if he loses. And Jackie Fargo, no way Jackie Fargo is going to lose his hair. Like, what's going to happen here? Right before the match happened, the weekend before the match happens, Al Green comes out on television and says, "Jackie Fargo, we got this match coming up where you're going to put up your hair. I'm going to put up my brother's title, $5,000. I'm going to leave the United States for 1 year, but I don't think you're ever going to show up because you're a coward. And not only are you a coward, you come from a long line of cowards." And Lance Russell, of course, you've heard Lance, on television. He goes, well, come on now, Al. Don't be talking about Jackie and his family like that. You don't need to be doing that. Don't be talking about it like that. And he goes, oh, Jackie Fargo's old man. I knew him for years. He is a yellow, and his dad's yellow. He's a yellow coward. And Fargo comes out from the back and tackles Al Green on live television, and they're going at it. And he chases Al off, and Jackie gets on the mic and he cries. Jackie Fargo, this crazy heel and then super tough baby face, does this interview about his father, and he gets to talking about his father, and he gets emotional, and tears are just flowing, crocodile tears down his face. He like vows, I'm going to get you, Al. And I sent you guys a recording of that match earlier. You'll have to check it out later after we get off the show. But August 8th, 1972, they draw 10,600 people to the Mid-South Coliseum. The referee stops the match because Jackie is bleeding so bad and cannot defend himself. And Al just keeps pounding and beating on him, and the referee stops the match and waves it off. And the crowd, you'll have to check this out. I sent it to you on YouTube. The crowd's mouths are just hanging open. Jackie Fargo has lost the match, and he's going to get his head shaved. And you can see the barber coming to the ring. He don't want to get in the ring. He don't want to cut Jackie Fargo's hair in front of these 10,000 people.
That was 10,000 people pissed off.
Oh my gosh. It's amazing. The atmosphere of this crowd when they have realized that Jackie Fargo has lost, and they finally get the barber chair set up in the middle of the ring. It was just a folding chair from the arena, and Jackie sits down in it. And the guy starts cutting his hair, and people are not leaving the building. They are sitting there with their eyes wide open and their mouth open to see Jackie Fargo's head get shaved. It just is amazing pro wrestling at its very best, I think.
It's amazing when Jeff Jarrett got his head shaved in WWE, and he came back with a better looking haircut. I'm like,
yeah.
that goes against everything you're supposed to do. You're
It's not supposed to be that way.
That Freddie Voorhees, once he takes off the mask in Friday the 13th, and like spots his ear and spots his ear. Jeff had like this real nice tight cut. He looked fantastic. He looked better when he got his haircut. I'm like, you just killed everything.
You're not supposed to come back looking like GQ.
That's right. Yeah.
You're supposed to look worse.
You're supposed to look horrible. It's always the thing where you get your hair cut, but you like leave it in patches. You don't get it cleaned up.
So
when Donald tried cut Vetch's hair, Vetch had all those patches on his head.
That's right. Yeah, that's how you. Yeah.
So Jackie comes back on television the next week, head shaved, embarrassed, doing a real calm, defeated interview where he says, "Al, you got me. You got my hair. I tell you what. If you beat me again, I don't think you can beat me twice. If you beat me again, I'll leave town." So the next week they do the loser leave town match, and Jackie wins the match, which then causes Al to come back and go, "Tell you what, Jackie, I still say you're a yellow coward. I still say you're yellow, and I want a cage match. I quit rules." And they do a I quit match in a cage the next week and draw 11,000 people to the Mid-South Coliseum. So Jarrett's on a roll here with these stories. I was talking earlier about how Roy had the instincts to understand how television was going to be a big component to growing the wrestling business. Jerry Jarrett probably took that to a whole nother level with the intricate kind of stories.
With the arena.
Yeah, and also taking the camera to the arena, which was something that Eddie also did that I don't think anybody else was doing at the time. They were going to the arena. They were shooting like the finishes. Like the reason we have this match on the hair match on tape is because they sent a camera there. They didn't do that before then. We never hardly ever saw anything that would go on at a house show on television. It was all in the studio. Little did we know that in 1972, when Jarrett and Eddie started doing that, wrestling would eventually just be that. It would just be an arena television show. But back then, it was very, unusual for that to happen. So it's just kind of interesting
Right here, Tony. These are from the Crow's Nest at the Tampa Armory, Fort Hester Armory, just house show matches and spots and stuff like that we used to use to insert in our TV shows for an angle,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you heard what I said, but I mean, eventually it would turn where it would just be an arena show.
Right.
Where back then it just, every now and then you might see a clip or a finish or something like that. Everything else happened in the studio. But eventually that pendulum swung all the way to the other side when Vince told Ted Turner, I ain't doing a studio show.
Right.
I'm doing an arena show, and I ain't going to do a studio wrestling show. Like that, putting all the puzzle pieces together and the evolution of wrestling, So they do a Texas death match and a bunch of other stuff. It's just amazing. But it solidified Jackie Fargo as like the legend in Tennessee. And so this is all coinciding with Jerry Jarrett building up what really is going to become the western end of the Roy Welch Empire, which people now call the Memphis territory. He opened up, he moved to the Mid-South Coliseum, which sort of made Memphis the center of that part of the territory, where on the other side you had Nashville, Birmingham, Huntsville, and on this side you had Memphis, and then now Jerry's going to open up Louisville, Evansville, Lexington, Kentucky. And essentially this goes back to Jerry Jarrett running spot shows and going up in that area and just running towns every now and then for spot show towns. And he decides, okay, well, if I'm going to be a part owner in the company, I need more than just spot shows. I need regular towns. I need a weekly loop. So he opens up Louisville and Evansville. And essentially Nick and Roy tell him the same thing they tell every town promoter. If you get television, you can run the town, right? So Jarrett goes and he negotiates a deal. He gets on in Louisville. He gets on in Evansville. And Louisville really starts taking off from the beginning, and all of a sudden he hears from Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder. So essentially, Evansville and Louisville were the southern part of the old Jim Barnett territory, Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle. And they ran Cincinnati and all of that, Louisville, Evansville, Indiana, Indianapolis. When Barnett and Doyle went to Australia in 1964, Dick the Bruiser basically came in. He didn't really buy anything. He just took over because Barnett and Doyle vacated it. Well, Bruiser came in with Snyder, and they partnered together, and they started running that whole big section of the country there. But they hadn't run Louisville and Evansville in probably 5 years. So Jerry thought it was open. So he goes in there. Bruiser and Snyder call up going, hey, you're running our towns.
Wow. After how many years?
5 years. 5 years. You're running our towns. And Jerry goes, no, you haven't been in there. You haven't been running this, that, and the other. So essentially what happened.
I can't imagine that this guy right here would claim that that's his town.
You're encroaching on his territory.
That's right. You kids get off my yard.
Yeah.
So Jerry Jarrett, who he has cut his mother in for 25% of this because he thinks he's got the majority of this with partners with Nick and Roy, which they inform him. Well, Jerry, we're your partners because you're using our talent from the Nashville office, and we pay for the television to be produced in Memphis. So we're providing you the show that you're running. So we're your 50% partners. So now Jerry Jarrett, who's done all this work, he's opened up Louisville, Evansville, and Lexington, now finds out that Roy and Nick is going to own 50%. I've given my mom 25%. I'm left with 25%, except now I got to give 5 or 10% to Bruiser and Snyder.
Wow. 15% he's got.
So he gets down to 15%. Now, what we know, go back to the Jim Barnett series where we covered the whole Georgia wrestling war. What happens in 1973 or so is Jim Barnett hires Jerry Jarrett to come to Georgia to be his genius booker. Watts has been his booker, and it's gone okay, but Barnett wants the wrestling war over with, and he wants somebody to come in there and pop the territory, so he hires Jerry Jarrett, who has gotten this big reputation now because he's booked all these things like we just covered with Jackie Fargo and Al Green and the feud with Tojo and him and everybody else. And he's drawing 10, 11,000 people to the Mid-South Coliseum every Monday night. And he's drawing people to Louisville and Evansville. So Jim Barnett decides, I want that kid to be my booker. And Jerry goes to Atlanta for half the week for several months, and he gets Georgia up and running and essentially ends the Georgia wrestling war as Gunkel goes out of business. And then Jerry comes back to Tennessee. When he comes back to Tennessee, Roy has really started showing a lot of the signs of dementia and has really gotten a lot more sick over the years from 1970 to 1973. And Buddy Fuller, Roy's son, tells Jerry, hey, I want to work with you for you to buy out Roy's half of the company. And so because he's had to give up this piece here to Bruiser and Snyder, I mean, Jerry thinks that's a pretty good deal. This is a way for me to get some of my percentage back. And eventually I will pay off Bruiser and Snyder and get them out of my hair. But that's all pretty interesting how Jerry Jarrett always seems to be the guy who gets some kind of short end of the stick and ends up coming out better than he was before. And I have not ruled out, by the way, Nick Goulas tipping off Bruiser and Snyder.
Yeah.
I think it would be.
That's probably a big.
I wouldn't be surprised if Nick didn't call up there and say, "Hey, just want to keep everything okay within the National Wrestling Alliance and everything. I don't want you guys to be upset and go tell Sam that we're running your towns." And I can see that happening.
I can too.
Yeah, I can see that happening. So then Nick goes back to Jerry, of course, and goes, well, they're going to call lunch, Nick, and you're going to lose your towns if you don't play ball with them, you know. And so that's kind of all that. One interesting thing I did dig up on this is there was a young 23-year-old aspiring newspaper reporter who covered a show in Louisville in 1938. Back then, there was a very known name around Louisville who was the wrestling promoter named Haywood Allen. Haywood Allen is a revered name in Louisville, and he brought a lot of wrestling into Louisville back in the 30s. And so Doug Cornett published a story in the Louisville Courier-Journal. And Doug Cornett at the time was just 23 years old, and he was not a sports reporter. Matter of fact, he wasn't a journalist at all. He worked kind of in the business part of the newspaper, but he covered this show in 1938 and wrote a big 2-column story about the show and everything. And his Doug Cornett would spend the next 30 plus years at the Louisville Courier-Journal in the management of the newspaper. And he had no clue that his son one day in Louisville, Kentucky, 40 years later, would be Jim Cornette, who would be taking photos of people there as a young teenage wrestling photographer, and that he would eventually end up being in the business. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
That's an amazing story there.
So they ran Louisville for the first time on July 14th, 1970. Had a main event of Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown against Al Green and Frank Martinez. No time limit, no disqualification. They drew about 1,000 people to that first show. They had only been on television about 6 weeks. But then on August 15th, 1971, this is about a year later, Jerry Jarrett books the first ever scaffold match in pro wrestling. And so August 15th, 71, here's the card. Cora Combs and Barbara Galento beat Sarah Lee and Sherry Lee. Sherry Lee had some connections to the Welch family.
And Sherry Lee ended up being Billy Coleman's mother-in-law. Billy Coleman ended up being superstar Billy Graham.
Yeah, and she worked Florida a lot, too.
Yeah, she settled in Florida. She just passed away down here in Florida.
The Alaskans beat Dennis Hall and Oni Wiki Wiki. Bearcat Brown and Eddie Marlin beat the interns with Dr. Ken Ramey. Jackie Fargo and Tojo Yamamoto in a huge match defeated Al Green and Sir Clements. Wilbur Snyder's on the card. Imagine that. While he's also getting a percentage of the gate because he used to own the town. Wilbur Snyder and Robert Fuller versus the Von Brauners with Saul Weingroff ended in a draw. And then in the main event, one man must knock the opponent off twice consecutively of the scaffold. Must knock him off twice consecutively. $5,000 to the winner. 12 feet in the air on a 2-foot board. Jerry Jarrett beat Al Green, knocking him off twice. And the match made the cover of Japanese wrestling magazines. You know, Tennessee didn't get a lot of coverage in the United States magazines.
Right.
They made the cover in Japan with the scaffolding match.
Wow.
What a horrible idea. You got a 2-foot wide board that you're on that's 12 foot above the ring. There's nothing you can do.
And so I didn't know. You knock him off twice. That's what I didn't understand when I was reading it. So why twice? I mean, the first time you go off, I'm not getting back up there.
Hell no.
I sent you guys the newspaper ad for it.
Yeah, that's what I saw. That's what I meant. I ain't get back up there twice. You know.
I became friendly with Jerry a couple of years before he passed away, and I asked him about this because I've never really gotten into the scaffold matches, you know, even in '86 when Cornette and the Road Warriors did it. And that was the main event of Starrcade '86, and it was the highest selling VHS videotape of that year, was the Starrcade '86 event. And the main event was the scaffold match. The Road Warriors, of course, knocked the Midnight Express off, and that's where Cornette got knocked off scaffold and blew out his knee. Yeah, blew out his knee. He had to have knee surgery and never was the same again. But I asked Jerry.
Wait a minute. What do you mean never was the same again? Did he hit his head?
His leg was never the same again, put it that way. But I asked Jared, I'm like, what was the deal on that, you know? And he said, I came home one night, and Jerry was big on television and movies, and he liked to watch a lot of that, and he'd get ideas from it. He said, I came home one night and turned on a late show after we'd been wrestling somewhere. There was a late movie on television one night, and it was back in the old medieval times, and these two gladiators were fighting over this canyon and there was a rock formation or something, and the one guy knocked the other guy off of there, and the guy won the battle, and it was the climax of the movie, and that's where he got the idea for the scaffold match. But, I mean, for Kentucky at this particular time of opening up the town and trying to draw fans, it was the right thing at the right time. And it was unique, you know, and, you know, I always thought Dusty overdid it, you know, because he had scaffold matches every night in towns, and really it's the ultimate kind of blow off match. You know, if you do it one time to end the program, and that's the end of it. But to use it as a, you know, to get guys to go up there every single night in a territory, I mean, that's a little abusive.
Yes,
the matches are terrible.
Yeah. You can't
what can you do up there? You can't do nothing up there.
Especially when you're on a 2-foot wide board. There's nothing you can do. I mean, you can't. You're going to fall off.
Bobby Eaton.
The match is horrible.
Bobby Eaton and Bill Dundee were the two who did the most up there that I've ever seen them. I mean, they were taking backdrops or whatever. Dundee grew up in a circus, you know, and so he was used to the high stuff and all of that and had no problem with it. But most guys, that is not their thing, you know, to get up there.
No.
Wouldn't be
especially
mine.
Jim Cornette.
Wouldn't be mine for sure. Well, and that was an afterbirth thing, right? Where Cornette climbs up there to get away from. But
still, Cornette up on a scaffold.
He's trying to get away from the Road Warriors, and they end up cornering him up there, and he falls up. Big Bubba was supposed to catch him.
Oh my!
Big Bubba's supposed to catch him, you know, and he comes down. He goes, "Jimmy, you fell so fast," you know, and he goes back to the man.
And that fat ass fell so fast. I'm sorry, Jim.
I lost it in the sun, you know.
You should have read your dad's newspaper clippings.
So, you know, and Christine Jarrett, we talked about it in a previous episode. She's been running shows, got her first town to run in 1955. So she's a huge asset here to Jerry. She's going to the towns every week. A lot of times she's being driven because he always had a driver. Eddie Marlin was her driver in the early days. And she's driven a lot of times by Pat Malone's wife, comes into town, drops the television tape off at the television station, gets the previous week's tape, goes to the Louisville Gardens, checks the advance at the box office, goes through a list of things to make sure everything's ready for the show, maybe goes out and talks to a few fans buying tickets on the walk up, set up the merch tables. Jim Cornette's mom by 1976 would be helping do that too, by the way, and she would drive Christine to Evansville a lot of times. And Jimmy would be there. I think Jimmy and I think we both became fans around. He might have been about a year before me in 71 or 72, but he would be there by 1976 putting his camera equipment out to take photos and run a tape recorder of, later years it was a boom box. I don't know what they used back in 76 to, very few wrestlers had music, but they'd play music every now and then. He'd run the device for doing that. And a lot of these weekly towns back in these days, and this is something I always wondered about as a fan, I found out later, but the ring stayed there. And a lot of times in these towns, the ring stayed in the basement, and the maintenance crew would be the ones they would put it up and take it down. And it's just amazing when you think about all the things it takes to run a wrestling show. And here's Jerry Jarrett, who I guess about this time would have been maybe 24 or 25, and he's putting together this whole wrestling company, which is half of the biggest territory in the whole United States.
Yeah, it's quite a remarkable story that Jarrett, at 16 years old, you send him to figure out who's stealing money from you. At 24 and 25, he's running the whole show. That's in half of a major territory. That's a pretty remarkable career.
So here's some more business numbers for you. So Louisville ran weekly for 52 weeks a year from 1970 to 1975. So in this 5-year period, they probably averaged about 3,250 fans a week. So that's 170,000 live tickets every year. So that's just under the 69 numbers that Nashville, Memphis, and Chattanooga and Birmingham, it took all those years to get to there. And so in 5 years, Louisville is selling almost 175,000 tickets a year, and probably around just a little bit, about 200,000 less than 1 million tickets in a 5-year period. So essentially, and we were talking about the different business models, right? So essentially, Goulas Welch Wrestling Company is selling the equivalent of the population of Louisville every 5 years. If you were to do that, in New York City, you'd have to draw 30,000 fans a week for 50,000 weeks a year for that same 5 years. That's the difference in the business models, right? So you might draw 20,000 people once a month, but to do the same thing they were doing in the South, you've got to draw 30,800 people every single week for 5 years. I don't know which model I like best. I don't know if I like to go in there one time a month and knock out 22,000, or do you want to draw almost 1 million people for 5 years?
As a booker, it's a lot easier going in once a month.
It is, yep, yeah. You can do your programs a lot faster.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and these guys freely admit they were writing television on the fly.
Yeah, well, they had to be. They had to be. It was sitting in a car. I've sat in a car with guys writing TV, and they're writing TV on the way to the next town.
And they had several shows to write for. Right. Chattanooga wasn't doing the same things that Nashville was doing. Nashville wasn't doing what Memphis was doing. Memphis wasn't doing what Birmingham was doing. Birmingham wasn't doing what Huntsville was doing.
And you got a lot of different city promoters with different thoughts and ideals too. So you're having to come up with different
and preferences about who they like.
And preferences who they wanted on top. Exactly.
Yeah, right. Evansville is a lot. It's a lot smaller scale. So and Evansville is kind of interesting too, because when Jerry Jarrett got television in Evansville, Indiana. So as a kid, we had an antenna on a iron pole, and we had a VHF antenna on top, which was a long flat antenna. Then underneath that, we had a bow tie antenna, which was a UHF antenna. So the big antenna picked up everything channel 2 to channel 13, and the little bow tie antenna picked up everything above channel 13. Mm-hmm. So when I was a kid, I'd go outside and grab that iron pole and turn the antenna to the south and get the Nashville show. So I'd watch everything that was going on in the Nashville show. I'd go back outside at about 1 o'clock that afternoon and turn the pole back north to Evansville and see what was going on in Jerry Jarrett's show. And I thought I was rich. I got 2 hours of wrestling a week.
Wow.
And most people didn't get that. Most people got 1 hour of wrestling a week, unless they lived in a big town, which had more stations that were running wrestling. But here, I mean, we were really lucky to get 2 hours a week and 2 different shows. But what was interesting here in Evansville, you have a conglomerate of towns right there where Evansville, Owensboro, and Henderson, Kentucky are kind of in this little triangle. When Jarrett got TV in Evansville, Nick started running Owensboro. And he started sending the Nashville tape to Owensboro, and Jarrett sending the Memphis tape to Evansville. Now, the bad thing about that was that, you know, Nick, you on the surface, you think, well, Nick is encroaching on Jerry's deal. But really, they didn't. They did that a lot, where maybe they had 2 stations in one town. Maybe, let's say, and I don't know this for sure, but I'll just pick one out of the thin air. Let's say there was Clarksville, Tennessee. Clarksville, Tennessee got 2 stations. They'd send 2 different shows to Clarksville to 2 different stations. So in one town, there'd be 2 stations. Now, what that did was the big roster they had, they could send different guys in there and people would still be able to follow it because they watched both television shows,
Right.
which was kind of convenient. I don't think Jerry took it that way. I think he took it. Nick was interfering in his deal, but you know, they could use different guys on the same town. And where that kind of came in handy is Nashville was also on Wednesday night. So they ran Evansville on Wednesday night and Nashville on Wednesday night. Well, all the big guys went to Nick's Nashville show, and Jerry would get whoever he possibly could, right? But because both shows were running in the market, he had a little bit more flexibility there. A good show at the Coliseum would draw anywhere from 500 to 750 people. And I've been to a whole bunch of those shows. I've been that 500 or 750 person many times. A great card in Evansville would be 1,500. But they ran it for over 20 years. Wow. I mean, that television show on WTVW Channel 7 in Evansville ran for over 20 years in that market. So it was a nice little regular weekly town in the Loop. Now, another little history thing I'll share with you here about Louisville and Evansville, and we've only found this out in the last couple of years because Thez did his book by memory, of course, and he put in there that he and Buddy Rogers had this argument in the car. It was backwards. Actually, the argument wasn't even an argument. Well, I'll just tell the story. So on March 27th of 1946, Thez had been in the business for 11 years, and Rogers had been in the business for just a little while. He'd started really catching on fire in Texas in 1945. So this is 1946. Buddy Rogers is going to be one of the hottest heels in wrestling and a top 10 box office attraction for the next 15 years. Going to be NWA champion in 61. Well, anyway, in the car, Buddy Rogers tells Lou Thez what a shame it was that the promoter had to pay that old fat bastard Strangler Lewis to referee their match, and that they gave money to Strangler Lewis that they should have made. And Rogers didn't know Strangler Lewis was Lou Thez's hero.
Yeah, his mentor.
His mentor, guy that kind of convinced him to, you know, after Strangler Lewis shot on Thez in St. Louis, Lou wanted to quit the business. And Strangler Lewis called up Thez's father, Martin Thez, and said, you got to tell that kid he don't quit. He's got something, you know, come on back, you know, we'll work with him. And essentially he mentored him and trained him. And, you know, and Lou got the NWA to pay Strangler Lewis 3% of the gate. That the NWA champion get 10 and Strangler Lewis would get 3.
Where the 13% started, right?
Yeah, and Rogers is complaining, say we should have made that money instead of Strangler Lewis. Well, Lou don't say anything in the car. They get to the arena, and Thez goes up to the motor and he goes, let me just tell you this. I don't know what you got planned tonight, but I can tell you this. I will not be losing to Buddy Rogers. I will not be losing to him on this night, nor any other night for the rest of our career. And he didn't. He never lost by pin or submission for the rest of their career. Lou would be champion through 1956 and then again through 1959 and a couple other times, and Pat O'Connor would be the one to drop the title to Buddy Rogers. But 15 years after this car ride, Buddy Rogers is pretty much regarded as the best in-ring performer. And to put more salt in the wound, Lou Thez, his father, and Lou and Martin Thez are partners with Tom Pax in St. Louis. And Sam Munchnick cannot make headway against them in St. Louis at all. Right. And the way Sam Munchnick starts making headway and eventually does beat them and take over the town is by bringing in Buddy Rogers to St. Louis. So there was a lot of contentiousness there. It all started on a car ride from Louisville to Evansville. So they got an interesting place in wrestling history. Also,
be careful what you say in the back seat of a car.
Like you say many times on this show, Jerry, you never know who's related to a Welch. So
you never know, yeah.
Louisville, by the way, was also February 23rd, 1943. The first time they ever saw a tag team match was Roy and Herb Welch. They beat a team of Nick Carter and Charlie King 2 out of 3 falls at the Columbia Gym, which started Louisville's long, long history of tag team wrestling. They opened up Lexington, Kentucky on January 8th, 1970, a tournament for the Southern Tag Team titles. They ran Lexington Catholic High School Gym for the first couple of years, which anybody who's ever been to Kentucky much knows that the biggest buildings in Kentucky are usually the high school basketball gyms. So they went in there and ran for a while. They eventually moved down to Georgetown, which is a smaller town, but part of that whole Lexington metro. And they moved to Country World Convention Center. And then finally, Rupp Arena opens in 1976 for the Kentucky basketball team with 24,000 seats. And Jerry starts running the Rupp Arena. They partitioned off half of it. So the capacity would be about 11 or 12,000. And eventually, Lexington would end up being the second biggest right after Memphis as far as drawing fans and making money for it. He would open up Tupelo, Mississippi for the Friday night town, and Jonesboro, Arkansas was Saturday night. So Jerry has basically started a whole new territory inside the big old territory that Roy and Nick already had. So pretty amazing.
Amazing.
So we're up to Jerry Lawler. You guys want to keep going, or do you want to?
What do you want to save Lawler for next week?
That's fine.
Lawler. Yeah,
that's fine. We got Jerry Lawler's going to come into the picture, which is going to be interesting because Jackie Fargo is the legend, and Jackie Fargo is also the guy who brings Jerry Lawler into the business. So it's an interesting decision for Jackie, and we know he did what was right for business. He ended up putting over Jerry and making Jerry the new legend of Tennessee wrestling. So we'll cover that whole story. Let's just talk about these business numbers, though, before we close up, and then we'll come back next week and we'll do episode 8.
Talk about the King.
Yeah. So from 1970 to 1975, the Welch and Gulas territory, listen to these towns. Monday night, Memphis drawing 9,000 to 12,000. Birmingham drawing 5,000 to 6,000. Tuesday night, Louisville drawing 3,000 to 5,000. They're also sending talent to Johnson City. They're also running Blytheville, Arkansas. They're also running with Bill Golden in Montgomery, Alabama. Wednesday night, Evansville, 700 to 1,500 people. Nashville, 4,000 to 5,000 people. Bowling Green, Kentucky, sending talent to Kingsport, Tennessee, and they're running with Bill Golden in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Thursday night, they're running Lexington, Kentucky. They're drawing 1,500 to 3,000. They're running Jackson, Tennessee, 3,000 to 5,000. They're running Paducah, 400 to 700 people. Friday night, they're running Tupelo, Mississippi, Huntsville, Alabama, where they're drawing 4,000 to 4,500. And they're sending talent to Knoxville on Friday night. Saturday, they're running Jonesboro. They're running Chattanooga, 5,000 to 6,000 people. And they're running Bill Golden, Selma, Alabama. So even with the expansion north in 1970, where Jerry Jarrett opens all these towns in southern Indiana and northern Kentucky, no Gulas Welch town. This is what's really amazing. All those towns I just said, none of those towns are more than 250 miles from Nashville.
Wow. Wrestler's dream.
Yeah.
So they got all of these guys that are going to all of these shows, and they're all within 250 miles driving. And we can't forget spot shows. I mean, they were running spot shows around all of these television towns, and by 1975, they had 18 television markets. So they go out, they get in a National Guard armory or a high school gym, and we don't have records for a lot of these shows. Maybe they weren't turned into the commission. Maybe they just weren't preserved. We're just now getting newspaper stuff that's been archived, and we're accessing and finding more and more wrestling shows all the time. But they send 6 guys out and a referee, and those guys, the referee brought the ring and the ring truck, and they got 2 singles matches, a tag match, maybe a battle royal, charged $2 or $3 a ticket, and might cost them $50 to $200 to rent the building. If they got a sponsor, the building didn't cost anything, and they might draw between 100 and 1,000 people. You know, the gross might be 500, it might be 5,000. There's some of the spot shows we do have records for. They drew 2,000 people. There was one spot show they drew 12,000 people, $12,000 gross to a spot show. So they used all of that. So check this out. So in 1975, which we also have to get into in the next episode, we're going to talk about Ron Fuller buys Knoxville. So for the first time in the whole history, the Welch family, a member of the Welch family, owns every town in Tennessee. So at the end of 1975, 1974. So in 1974, Memphis, which was 200,000 in 1969, now has sold 500,000 tickets in 1974.
Wow.
Half a million tickets in Memphis alone. Television viewership for the Memphis metro area, according to Nielsen, was 600,000 people. And the city population is 720. That's 83% of the population watching television, watching this wrestling show. In Evansville, Indiana, the Nielsen ratings show the audience for the weekly wrestling show is twice as big as SEC basketball and 6% larger than Big Ten basketball and 66% bigger than the NBA. Of course, the NBA in 1975 is not the NBA of today. No. But they're right in there, and they're a big sports franchise, this Gulas Welch wrestling territory. 1975 total revenue just for the state of Tennessee, $1.58 million, which in 2025 money would be almost $10 million. Ooh. They sell more tickets than the Vanderbilt and University of Tennessee athletic programs combined.
Wow.
They have 152 wrestlers on the roster. 77 of them live in Nashville. They are running 48 towns, either regular office towns that are weekly or spot shows or sending talent to promoters. And the network of television stations I mentioned before is 18. And they're not all live. By this time, they're starting to bicycle some tapes, but they still got live shows in Huntsville, Birmingham, Chattanooga, Nashville, and Memphis. And off of those primary towns, they're sending out tapes to the other 13 or so. I mean, that's amazing. That's a business right there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. What an empire Roy Welch and his family built.
Got to take your hat off. Yeah, exactly. And you're not going to have a business like that in the United States of America without, you know, the way we started this episode, without some political stuff that you have to deal with, because the regulators are going to look at you, the legislators are going to look at you, and other people are going to want some of the power.
The vultures start circling real quick in that business like that.
Yeah, look at all you're eating. I need some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Episode 7 in the books. Come back with Jerry the King Lawler, and episode 8 will be up next. But it depends on how you're watching this. It might be up right now. So episode 8 coming soon.